Hello, race fans, hot rodders, politicos, and political junkies. Welcome to another episode of Grassroots Chronicles. I am your co-host, Carlos Mulathaler, aka Mr. Grassroots, and along with me is Caleb Stokes, Mr. Communications. And joining us, as always, our producer, Jonathan Torres with the Yard Sign Network.
Hello, fellas. Let's do it.
On this episode, we will focus on the top 10 grassroots tips that we feel that are a form of informing individuals on the basics of grassroots. I also want to remind our audience that we do not endorse candidates or political parties. We are here to inform and educate individuals on how they can make a change in their community from the grassroots level. But first, let's go to communications. Mr. Communications, Caleb, what's cooking on your end, sir?
All right. You are listening to the Grassroots Chronicles on the Yard Sign Network, wherever you find your podcasts, Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music. We are there. Coming up, we have the email of the day. It's from Zachary in Chicago, Illinois. Zachary says, I'm a father of two high school age children currently enrolled in the Illinois public school system. Right now, the standard education plan in our district does not provide my oldest daughter the chance to develop her aptitudes in shop class, automotive class, different trade classes, etc. I've considered several ways to make a change, including a local education campaign, becoming a teacher myself, or running for public office. But a lot of different folks are saying public office might be my best bet. If this is the case, which elected office should I consider to make the biggest difference in my child's education? As always, thank you for your advice, Mr. Grassroots and Mr. Communication, Zachary from Illinois. You know, this actually ties into the first tip we're going to give in Grassroots, and that's that all politics is local. Zachary, I know that having the honorable before your name, that title of congressman, could actually be really enticing. But you already talked about, running a local education campaign. That might be better than running for public office. But if you do, why not consider school board? Why not consider, maybe city council? That could somehow help impact your child's education. But state representative, even state senator. Being a congressperson certainly has its pros, right? That's very attractive, especially if we care about status. But it's not always about status if we're looking to make a change. Sometimes focusing on localities and local offices might be what's best, at least if you decide to actually run rather than a different way of making a change. Mr. Grassroots, Carlos, what say you?
Well, I say probably one of the most impactful things you can do is run for something local. And going into we're going to do a backwards tip. So we're going to start at top 10 and then work our way down to the number one tip. So it's starting at number 10, to quote the great Tip O'Neill, former Speaker of the House, back in the 80s. He said, all politics are local. And that is so true. Everything begins in your backyard, in your neighborhood. That's where the most impactful things you can do. Running for Congress is a great title. Like you said, it's beautiful to have the honorable next to your name. But really the impactful part is on the local level, whether it's a school board, county commission, city council or mayor of your town. That's really where you make a big difference. And that's what it is. So tip number 10, all politics are local. Moving on down to number 9, values is what identifies us and brings us together.
Carlos, real quick, I just want to jump in, being that it's an education question. I have a lot of family in public education. And again, this is where the political narrative doesn't fit the reality narrative, which is, your state legislature only to a certain extent will dictate curriculum and even funding. Here in Florida, the governor can certainly set salaries, but in large part, they just provide a large bucket of funding, and it's each district, each school district, that determines how they spend that money. And so from county to county, that money's spent differently and allocates those resources differently. And so a lot of them want to point the finger at the capital, at their state capital and their state legislature in terms of the curriculum and the and how money is spent, when in reality those decisions are made locally. Those decisions are made at the county level, at the school district level, and running for school board. I don't think people realize how much impact you can have, be it on the school board or at the city level or the county level.
That's a great point, Jonathan. Talking about just throwing money at a problem. That's what Washington does best, right? That's what Zachary from Illinois, that's the opportunity you would have if you were a congressperson from Illinois. However, if you're wanting to make additions or make changes to curriculum, specifically at a high school in a certain district, maybe adding these trade classes that would benefit your daughter and the shop classes and automotive classes in which she's interested, running for school board. It may not be the sexiest thing you've ever heard. It might not be being a congressperson, but not only is it something that's going to make a huge difference in your community and for your family, but it's also something, frankly, that's just a little bit more practical. Running for school board, it is absolutely difficult to attain, that idea of being a school board member and winning the race, but it's something that is more easily reached than it would be running for Congress. Now shifting, that was number 10. All politics are local, Mr. Grassroots. Number 9, as you just said, values identify us. They bring us together. We talked in a previous episode how queuing into audiences, whether it's one person on a front porch or whether it's a large room of individuals, queuing in is key. Queues build relationships, and relationships over a certain period of time builds trust. The Oxford English Dictionary says that a value is a person's principles or one's judgment of what is important in life. Values stand as the biggest cue that we could provide. Because values, as Oxford English Dictionary says, it's something that's so incredibly important to who we are. It's one's judgment of what is important in life. If we share a value, that cue is immediately going to build a relationship, and not just a relationship, but likely a trusted relationship. Carlos.
Absolutely. And values come in different ways. It could be religious values. It could be patriotic values. In this particular case, with this gentleman that wrote in, you have the value of education, and that's a very big part of parents. That's a huge common denominator, the importance of education in our children's life, whether it's be public or charter school, whatever the case may be, or even university level. It is important. That is a big value if you could bring together that people can, come around and agree and resonate the troops.
Absolutely. Okay, so number 10, all politics local. Number 9, values identify us, they bring us together. Number 8, we're all in the communication business. Doesn't matter what role we play on a certain campaign or initiative, whether we're designing the website, we're designing certain brochures, we're knocking on doors, or if we're the candidate themselves. We're always in the communications business. That's our role, is to agree and find the why of the campaign and share that why as much as possible. Because even if you are just the person that's following all the different policies running through your state legislature, at some point, someone's going to say, what is it that you do? What are you passionate about? We are always in the business of communications.
I can't agree more. And communication is in so many different levels. It's not just necessarily getting up and speaking, but it's also researching, listening to city council meetings or county commission meetings, and disseminating that information as well. Because at the end of the day, we want to be considered a trusted source so that people will rely on us a little bit on what is going on out there. There's a lot of information. So if you can be that one individual to help disseminate it and find out certain, websites or platforms to get your information, do that and encourage people to do what you do the same. Because one of the things we always talked about is in grassroots, we can do a lot of things, but the real value of who you are is when you're able to multiply yourself. So don't be a greedy gremlin along these episodes. Share the information with individuals and encourage individuals to get involved, because Caleb, Jonathan, we can't do it ourselves. We want to multiply ourselves. That's what we're here and sharing our information. And that leads us to number 7. What does the initials PR mean in the grassroots world? Well, out in the business world, PR stands for
public relations.
exactly. But in our world of grassroots and the Grassroots Chronicles, it stands for personal relationships. This is a key and a must that you must try to do as much as possible is build those relationships, get to know individuals, listen to people. It's not just about what we have to say or what you have to say. A lot of it, building that relationship, is finding out their values. You're in the communication business, right? You're in the local level, and you want to build that trust. You want to build that relationship, and it's also listening. It's not just talking. Halfway of getting anything accomplished is having an open mind as well.
Agreed. You are listening to the Grassroots Chronicles on the Yard Sign Network. Mr. Grassroots, Carlos Muhletaler, Mr. Communication, Caleb Stokes, here with Jonathan Torres, producing number 6 of Grassroots Tips for Mr. Grassroots himself. He says, number 6, you are always telling a story. So there's a difference between telling a story and sharing a story. Yes, we talk about sharing your why, sharing stories. That's what tugs the heartstrings. We talked about that last week. However, telling a story is different from sharing that story, because telling the story means I'm a member of a campaign. I might be the candidate myself, or I'm just somebody that knocked on doors one day for Carlos, and I'm wearing a shirt that says, "Vote Carlos for City Council." Well, if I'm at Chili's that evening with a few of my friends, maybe I should keep in mind, not only am I wearing that Carlos for City Council shirt, but I'm now an influencer in Carlos's campaign. Therefore, I'm always telling a story, whether I'm wearing that shirt or not. So maybe I have one less margarita at the bar that night while I'm in the midst of Carlos's campaign. Or maybe if I have his bumper sticker on my car and I'm wearing the shirt and someone cuts me off while I'm driving, maybe I'm sure to keep both hands and both middle fingers on the steering wheel. You're always telling a story. And if you're in the midst of a campaign of any kind, the story that you tell will be illuminated through social media. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, Caleb, I can't, that was an excellent point, because there is a major difference between sharing a story like we're doing right now and also telling a story. And from my perspective, telling the story is who you are without, we're conveying a message to people, the way we dress, our body language, the way we drive, the way we act in public. We don't have to say anything. We are telling people a little bit about ourselves. So the question is, what do you want people to know about you, right? What's the impression you want? I'm not telling people how to dress. I'm not telling people how to drive. I'm not telling people what to eat. But there is a perception. So what is that story that you are always telling? So just be aware that in the grassroots world, especially if you're in getting involved in campaigns, as soon as you walk into a room, you're on. All eyes are on you. So just be mindful how you enter the room and how presentable you are and how prepared you are and ready to go, because that sticks in people's minds, unfortunately.
For sure. And Saul Alinsky took an extreme position on this, but he always said that if you need to cut your hair and go into a boardroom in a suit to try to influence folks, you need to do it because you're telling a story. And again, we'll revisit our good friend Uncle Saul Alinsky, later on, because that will be the topic for next week. But number 5 on the list right now is which drop in the bucket are you, Carlos?
Yeah, and this is something I've always told individuals. You have to be a drop. And what drop in the bucket are you going to be? This bucket is not going to get filled up on its own. It's going to have to get filled up by numerous types of drops. And you have to find what your drop is going to be. Are you going to be a communicator? Are you going to be a recruiter? Are you going to be a campaign sign waiver? Are you going to be, an op-ed writer? What are you, phone banking, door knocking? What are you going to do to fill this bucket? Now, you could be multiple drops. But I've always challenged individuals, you've got to at least find one, you got to be at least one drop in this bucket. Find something that you're comfortable, something that you like doing, that something that resonates with you and that you feel content doing, right? And you feel complete, and do it. And share that story, not tell it, share that story of what you're doing. Because what was that quote we did last week? People, how does that go, Caleb? About people who find out what you do?
Well, people care why you do it. They don't care what you do.
Exactly.
They care why you.
So that's important along that quote, it's important that you share your information and what you're doing with individuals and find it, because it's not going to change on its own, ladies and gentlemen. And it's not going to change by you sitting there on your couch or screaming at the radio, the television, or whatever it may be. You've got to get up. And to quote a friend of ours, you have to move from the seats to the streets. You've got to get up and go do something memorable. So,
And just
along those
to
lines,
piggyback off of that for just a second, one bucket in a campaign, if that campaign is a bucket, your drop might be different to a different bucket, because every campaign is different. There's so many different people that are bringing in and experiences that they have. For instance, I might be the best guitarist. Jonathan and I are starting a band. I might be the best guitarist. However, the drums, and Carlos doesn't know how to play the drums, but he might be a really good guitarist and guitar better than Carlos. If we're making a band together, I'm going to be playing this. That is my contribution to this specific band with Carlos and Jonathan, and that is my. And for anyone who doesn't know, Jonathan Torres would be front and center lead singer. Number 5, Carlos and the Grassroots tips. You say the devil is in the details.
yes, the devil's in the details. This is a simple one. Ladies and gentlemen, whatever you do, make sure you got your T's crossed and your I's dotted. It's the little things that will get you in trouble, will slow you down. Don't overlook things. Double check things. Do it. Have other eyes look at things. Read them over. Share your ideas with others, and always go over your steps at least 2 or 3 times to make sure, because you'll always find something that you were missing. And sometimes it's the little things that make your event memorable, but not in a good sense, right? And so, make sure you take a look at things, and the devil's in the detail.
Well, and if I could just add to that, because we are in such a hyper sensitive, hyper observant media environment right now, that the media is going to pounce at any opportunity to criticize your campaign or to look for flaws in your campaign. And so when they catch those things, it could be attendance at one of your events. It could be maybe not having enough flags or having too many flags, or they're going to look for something to pick at. And so the details are incredibly important. And sometimes it's even in places you wouldn't even imagine.
Absolutely, Jonathan.
Yeah, devil being in the details and your lapel. I mean, go back to the 2008 election between Barack Obama and John McCain campaign, who never would have thought, oh, he's not wearing a flag pin in the lapel. It's okay, because that made headlines for weeks, that this is a guy who didn't even wear a flag pin, and small that was overlooked because it didn't necessarily seem important to campaign. However, it was important to several voters, but specifically for the news cycle, as Jonathan said, the media that loves to sometimes nitpick everything. All right, rule number 3, Carlos.
Number 3, plain and simple: be real, be yourself. Don't try to be somebody you're not. If there's a situation where somebody asks you a question, whether you're knocking on doors or if you're a candidate, just say, hey, I don't know. That's a great question. Let me get back to you. Let me have your information. I'll get back to you. There's nothing wrong. The moment you try to be somebody or do something that is not who you are or what you usually do, it will be smoked out. And unfortunately, it's hard to get back that information, that perception of people may have of you. So plain and simple, be yourself, be real. If somebody's asking you some questions and you're not sure or you're not confident, tell them, I'll get back to you. And that's it. Get their information.
Or even if they ask you a question and it's one with which you disagree, asking, it's okay. Be yourself. Don't try to pander to different audiences that differing up to you. These wonderful things right here are called telephones. We can do several other things, but we can also record conversations. And a lot of time group and giving a speech, or you're at a debate or a forum, things that are said will be caught on. Pander to one audience and then quickly turn around to another audience and say something. It's going to be picked up by that lovely news cycle about which Jonathan was speaking. Number 2, grassroots tips.
Use your melon. Use your melon. That's what my wrestling coach used to say to us all the time in high school. Come on, fellas, use your melon. It's simply just use your head. And one major part of it is do not overthink grassroots. Grassroots is pretty simple. It's just using your head, planning ahead. You're watching out the devil's in the details, and just taking your time a little bit, and don't rush through things. And Jonathan also alluded to that. Take your time in this age of hyper information and data and news. Just make sure you take your time and don't overthink it. A lot of it's pretty simple.
All right. The number 1 grassroots tip. Jonathan Torres, Mr. Producer.
All right, here we go with number 1. It is grassroots is a way of life.
That's right.
Boom.
And this was one of the hardest lessons that I think I had to learn coming into politics, because I came into politics and advocacy later in life, in my mid 20s, late 20s really, and I already had an established career in marketing and advertising, specifically with a focus on the digital side. And so I come into good old politics, and there are staples that we, of course, talk about every episode in politics that are tried and true and have not changed probably for hundreds of years, and probably as old as democracy itself. And at first, I was like, well, gosh, digital would solve this, and Facebook ads would solve this, and like all this kind of shiny, flashy new stuff. It's like, why aren't we doing all this kind of stuff? And and until you disconnect yourself from that and realize how impactful grassroots politics is, you don't truly understand how, infinitely more powerful it is than the latest digital tools that are out there. Do we have more tools in our tool belt than ever? Absolutely. And is it a lot easier now for maybe smaller campaigns to have a larger voice or a bigger impact? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, there is nothing more impactful than going door to door and talking to the voters and your neighbors. There's nothing more impactful than calling them and asking for their support and asking for their vote. And again, that was a really hard lesson for me to learn early on.
And Jonathan, I can't agree with you more. That's the fundamentals and the basics of grassroots. It's connecting personally, one-on-one with individuals, having that conversation. You can use the phone and things, and that's fine. But when you're face to face and you're shaking somebody's hand and you're looking them in the eye, or they're looking at you in the eye, and you can have an honest conversation or questions going back and forth, that's real. And as much as we have all these new forms of communication, which are great because they do help, absolutely get your message out. But I still believe that today we're all still human beings. And human beings like to have a little bit of interaction with another human being within a topic or two, or a cause. And that still to me is fundamental. And that's why these 10 tips that I've put together over the past 25 years of my life, I came with a conclusion that at the end, it's a way of life. This is something I do every day, or part of it. And I hope that people will adopt a couple of these, and use them throughout their day. Because grassroots is an everyday thing. It's not just, there's 90 days left, let's go knock on doors. No, this is every day. If you truly want to make a difference in your community, it has to be part of you, and let people know and share that story.
Agreed. And just because it's something that's every day, and it's hopefully a lifestyle, for you and your family, that shouldn't be intimidating or overwhelming. It's easy for it to seem like a big mountain that you have to climb, that, oh my gosh, I have to make. No, it's being involved in your community the same way we're involved in our kids' school, churches, same we're involved with, and hopefully know many of our different neighbors. It's finding a way to embrace the idea of community. And watching those 2 extra episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond on a Thursday, maybe I attend a forum and I host some type of forum, or maybe like Zach from Illinois, Zach's for school board, rather than watching those 2 extra episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond Thursdays. But yes, it is a lifestyle, and that's fun. 100%.
Well, Caleb, I think you just nailed something on the head, without even realizing it, which is that, a lot of these tried and true measures of best practices in grassroots all harkens back to when we were a community, small town politics, where you knew your neighbors, you knew the people who made the decisions in your community. You would go to each other's houses for dinner and lunches, and it was that kind of camaraderie, that kind of relationship in a community that when somebody would come to your house and say, hey, I really think you should support this person or this issue, then you said, okay, well, if you're going to back that guy, I'm going to back that guy. It was that seal of approval. And even though we don't know our neighbors as well as we used to, I think instinctively, again, it goes back to that, okay, well, if this person is willing to make the effort to come to my door and advocate for that individual, that must say something about them. And that seal of approval is worth more than any piece of mail or any digital campaign that you can put out there.
And Jonathan, you just triggered something. On that note, nothing's going to be more evident than that than on Monday night with the caucus in Iowa, where people actually drag their friends and they bring their families and members, and they're all going to sit there in one room and start working themselves into who they're going to vote for openly. There's nothing secret about this.
Yeah.
You choose, and you're going to follow and people are going to make cases for each one of the candidates in the primary. So anyway, I think that's a great way.
Let me make a very relevant example then. The Trump campaign, or it may have been just some of his supporters, were criticizing Ron DeSantis for hosting a talk in someone's living room at someone's house. Because again, that's not something that Donald Trump would do. But that is something that goes back decades, in this country, and that is true grassroots politics. And in these early states, that's how you win those votes.
Absolutely. Reading Politico recently, they talk about how there are our standard election polling going on in Iowa for the caucuses now, but the real polling might actually party chairs, and how each county has a party chair and who that county equally support, because that might go a bit further in terms of a caucus rather than keeping things local. Again, back to number 10 all the way to number 1 of grassroots, a lifestyle. Mr. Grassroots, Carlos Mulataller, Mr. Producer, and the producers. 2 nights ago, the movie starring Nathan Lane, Matthew Broderick, and Mel Brooks produced. So your name from here on out, then this is Mr. Producer. Hope you're but yeah, just always remember right now, here is the week, and it ties into next week's topic, that power is not only, but it's what the opposition thinks you have. We're going to talk a little bit more about what will actually be the first of a 2-part series on our dear Uncle Saul, his rules for radicals, how those rules have been used really since the 1950s and 60s by all different parties today. You've been listening to the Grassroots Chronicles Network. As always, we appreciate your time listening, and we appreciate you making the difference in your city, your county, your state, and our nation. On behalf of Mr. Grassroots, I am Mr. Communication, Caleb Stokes. Jonathan Torres, Mr. Producer, is hanging. Again, you can find us any place you find podcasts, whether that's Spotify. We are where you listen to podcasts. This is the Grassroots Chronicles saying good night.